All right, guys, welcome into the Alabama postgame show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. He's Matt Scalisi. I'm Simone Eli. Many of you just finished up listening to Alabama head coach Nick Saban talk about this one against LSU. Not something I thought I'd be saying tonight about 10 o'clock. Alabama survives LSU at home, and that really is the entire story of this game tonight. 20-14, the final score. Matt, the way I think we should break down this show, other than getting some great comments, I'm sure, is the good, the bad, the ugly, because there was a little bit of everything. First of all, your initial thoughts after this game.
You want me to start with the good? You want to put the hardest part first?
Yeah, well, I feel like there are some maybe small things defensively.
For sure. Look, ultimately, it's a win, and that's a positive. And I will say this: Saban, if you were on our page just now watching Nick Saban's press conference live, he actually had a lot of positive things to say, and I'm sure that he's not going to sound so positive when he gets in the film room with his team. But the first thing he highlighted was the defensive performance. You're holding LSU to a season low total in points.
Sure.
I know that everybody tends to fixate on the long drives that were given up, but Saban pointed out just now, outside of that one long sustained drive that got them to 14, really Alabama did not let LSU score tonight. They did not let them get in the end zone. They didn't really even let them get into field goal position most of the time. Yep. It was a really intense, really dominant performance from this defense against a good offensive line with a running back that I think is pretty powerful, and that's been something Alabama struggled with at times this year.
Yeah.
Is this the most talented offense they've played all year? Probably not, but I think it was still a really strong performance. And I think if you look at the stretch here, right, the defense got put in a really tough position in this game. They were on the field for an extraordinary amount of the second half,
yep,
and their backs were against the wall, and they had to get stops, and they got them. And I think that is something worth taking away as a positive in this game.
Yeah, ultimately, to your point, Matt, whether you're playing LSU's offense or Northridge High School, the fact is that this offense had multiple opportunities to go down the field and take a lead in this game, at least 3 that I can remember in the second half, in the fourth quarter or late in the third. And for Alabama's defense to step up the way that they did when put in difficult situations after the Bryce Young turnover because of the fumble, multiple situations, like you said, for them to eventually stand tall and not allow LSU to progress the field, not allow LSU to really have a chance at the end zone and ultimately take a potential lead in this game because, of course, Alabama, missed the extra point, which we'll get to all of the kicking situations in a second. But I think you have to credit Alabama for a little bit of the good in this because of those situations they were able to stand tall.
I think for sure the defense you have to give a lot of credit to. There's no question that this is probably one of the toughest positions that they've been in this season. I can't think of a tougher one, and they came through. And I think you go back and look at the end of that Texas A&M game, they had to get a stop late in that game, and they collapsed. They couldn't do it, and they got it done tonight against LSU. Again, I don't think this is quite the same scenario. I think that A&M team was on fire. They were there. They had a quarterback that was feeling it. This LSU offense was not as good, but Alabama still, I would say arguably they were in a worse position because the offense could not get anything going. I think you could feel it with some of the decisions being made by the coaches in the second half of this game in the fourth quarter. They didn't trust this offense. They didn't trust the offensive line particularly, and they basically put the entire game on the defense's back and said, we need you guys to win it. And they came through. They were able to do it. So high pressure situation for that group, and they got it done. Will Anderson just had a spectacular game. And really, honestly, really good play from the defensive backs all game too. And that's a sign of progress, I think, because they've been kind of gotten a reputation for giving up big plays this season. They didn't really do it tonight.
Sure, no question. A lot of comments that we're getting right now is regarding the offensive line play, and there is no question that is a major point of concern. Now, injuries were a problem. Center, that obviously controls everything that makes those 5 guys go, but ultimately protection was a problem. The run game was a problem, Matt, pretty much all night. But Bryce Young, it's safe to say, was on the turf way too often in this game today, and we're talking about LSU. We're not talking about Georgia's defense in Atlanta in the first week of December. We're talking about LSU, and let's not even start with what the beginning of the game looked like, because you just look at the second half of the game when it is crunch time and you have to progress the field, and Alabama's getting nothing done up front.
No, and I don't, even though I think that the offensive line and having Dalcourt out of the game was a huge disadvantage and put them in a really tough spot, I don't think you can put it all on just the offensive line. I think at some point over the course of the game, adjustments have to be made when you see what's happening. I think if there's anybody on the team I don't put it on, it's the running backs. I think we've seen
I agree.
These backs make good plays. They just had no room tonight, and the lack of a rushing attack was not on the backs at all.
Yep.
I think Saban is going to be defensive of Bryce Young. He protects his quarterbacks, especially when they're young.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Bryce Young made some mistakes tonight. I don't think it's entirely on him, but I think you can go and point to the pass where he throws to an ineligible receiver at some point. That was a very costly penalty.
Mm-hmm.
I think his decision making in pressure situations was not always great tonight, and I think that's a troubling thing to see at this point in the season. I think if you go also and look at the receivers, I think there were some drop passes tonight. I think there were some miscommunications where the guys were not running the routes that Bryce Young seemed to be expecting them to. But above all else, Simone, and this is not the first time I've said this year, I just really don't like the play calling of this offense. I don't understand what the strategy is. I don't understand what the identity is supposed to be for this offense. I don't know what their bread and butter is, if you ask me to describe it.
Yeah.
I just don't have a sense that this offense has a plan that they are taking to other teams. It just very much feels to me like they are watching what other defenses are doing and being purely reactive to it. And I think that catches up to them a lot of times. I think it ends up making them feel like they can't be aggressive. They're just trying to do the smart/safe thing.
Sure.
And that's not how you win football games. I think it continues to baffle me that we're not seeing some kind of identity emerge in this offense this far into the season.
Well, Matt, if you think back to our pregame show, and for those that were watching, we aired a Nick Saban soundbite, and it was a great question from AL.com's Mike Casagrande, pretty much saying, like, what's the thought process? What's the balance? What's the identity, really, is the question he was asking when it comes to the run game versus the pass game. And Nick Saban was very, very clear in that they take what the defense gives them. Okay, well, I mean, that makes sense, so to speak. But like you said, Matt, it's still, there's so many questions when it comes to some play calling decisions. We've seen some issues in the red zone down the stretch at Texas A&M. And so, yeah, sure, it's frustrating for us, as fans or as people in the media to watch that and to really not know what it is that's going on decision-wise behind the scenes.
It's tough. And look, I am by no means an expert on offensive football. I'm saying this as a guy who watches every game and has watched them for years.
A lot of other people are saying it too in the comments.
This team does not seem clear to me what the setups and the payoff are intended to be, right? Like if you want to think about it that way, I don't know what is being done in terms of strategy that is setting Alabama up for success later in games. And I feel like I have been able to see it in previous seasons. So I don't think it's necessarily entirely on Bill O'Brien. I definitely don't think it's entirely on one player or group of players on this team. But I think overall something is not clicking. It's not gelling. And I don't think this offense looks comfortable, even when they win. Even in games where they've won comfortably, you can go back and look at the Tennessee game that we just had recently here. I don't think, despite the margin of victory, I don't think they looked comfortable on offense in that game. Sure. And that's again, you can see things like that early in a season and still have hope that they're going to have time to turn it around. But we're kind of getting to a point where you might just kind of be who you are at this point.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the numbers, Nick Saban was just asked about this. 6 total rushing yards, positive yards. That's how they compute that. 6 rushing yards for Alabama, which, I mean, I don't think anyone could have bet on that in pregame. 302 in the air, which sounds really nice, but it just seemed as though Bryce Young, the rhythm really wasn't there in the run game, in the pass game, throughout the entire game, offensively at all. Matt, to your point that you just said a moment ago, I think it's easy for folks to compare team by team, year by year when it comes to Alabama. But the end of the day is that this Alabama team does not have the offensive weapons that they have had in the past few years. I mean, they've had 4 receivers who are absolute studs and one slant route turns into an 80-yard touchdown like that. Now, does that happen here and there in this offense currently with guys like Jameson Williams, John Mechie at times? Yes, but not nearly those big explosive plays on a consistent basis, which is something that Saban has been asked about pretty often in the last couple of weeks.
For sure. Although I do think we saw flashes of it, which is part of why it's so frustrating, is because you saw that they can do it. That, Bryce Young finally hit, one of his receivers on a deep ball tonight. Jameson Williams streaking past the safety looked like what we're more familiar seeing out of this offense for the past few years. Yep. But it certainly doesn't happen consistently. It certainly doesn't seem to be something that is built into every offensive drive to take those kinds of shots. I would love to hear from somebody who's a little bit more of an expert of understanding what they're looking at and what's not working here. But I would overall just say, I don't think that this offense seems like things happen naturally for them. They are not all on the same page, and that's a tough spot for them. I don't know that I necessarily. I think that's probably fair, Simone, that they don't have the same level of skill position talent at this point. Part of that's because of injuries. I think Jace McClellan was a really valuable weapon who was becoming pretty versatile when they lost him. Overall, this receiver group just hasn't stepped up the way that their predecessors have. Outside of Jameson Williams, I do think that he's really a star player, but I think we've seen that what really made this offense take off was having more than one guy like that. And I'm just not sure they have more than one guy like that right now.
Yeah.
But yes, the lack of consistency on the offensive line, and a lot of that coming from not having the same lineup, not playing together for that many snaps. I think that's probably their number one issue, their biggest concern of all of them.
Appreciate a lot of the comments that we're getting. Someone said I could be the offensive coordinator. I'm totally fine with that. Curtis Lewis, I want to pull up this because I was about to talk about the bye week, and I think this is kind of hilarious. I mean, eat pizza, chase girls. What have they done during the bye week? They won't be Auburn with this team. Okay, here's my thing to this point. I'm not going to say that's what they were doing during the bye week. It is relatively concerning, or maybe you can blame the bye week, but it is concerning to think that you have a week off of preparation, that you have a week of rest, that you have a week of kind of getting your nuts and bolts together a little bit, and to come out like you did. Now, some folks would say, hey, that is because of the bye week. We got out of rhythm. We had time off. We, ate pizza and hung out and didn't do, the things we need to do to prepare for a game. Some folks would say, all right, well, it shouldn't be that way. This team should be looking as sharp as ever coming off of the bye week and playing a really, really poor LSU team.
I definitely think it's puzzling that they looked so unprepared coming off of what should have been extra time to prepare for this game.
Yeah.
But I also know that this team is missing some pretty key players, and they were missing more after about a quarter. Their center coming out of the game was pretty harmful to them. I think overall. We saw a couple of other guys get dinged up over the course of the game. Saban said none of them are serious. I don't think he even thinks Dalcourt's going to miss next week.
Yeah.
But beyond that, they've started to add up a little bit over the course of the season. Like we said, you lose a valuable weapon at running back in Jace McClellan. You lose, a couple of your key defensive players. I thought Drew Sanders would be out for a full month of the season when he got injured, and he showed up in there tonight a couple of times late, basically because they were running out of bodies. But I think that's been concerning too. So in addition to, I think, whatever other issues are going on, this is a team that's had trouble playing with consistency because they have not really fielded the same lineup very consistently. They've had so many guys coming in and out because of injuries. Yeah. So it's probably been tougher for them to all get on the same page because of that too. Just some frustrating things to see for a team that we're not used to seeing have things like depth issues, like not finding enough talent on offense. These are not problems that Alabama has had in quite a while.
Sure. No question. If you're just tuning in, it's the Alabama Postgame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. He's Matt Scalisi. I'm Simone Eli. The first 15 minutes of the show, it's kind of felt as though Alabama lost this game against LSU.
Definitely feels like a loss in the comments.
Yes, no question. The Tide did pull out the win, 20-14, the final score against the Tigers. Matt, let's talk about implications right now, because at the end of the day, Bama, goes to 8-1 on the year. 5-1 in the conference, still very much control the West, especially after Auburn loses. They are the only one-loss team in the West right now. Everything is still ahead of the Tide. This is not something that you wanted to see, but sometimes you have to win ugly games. It's a situation that's the hand that's dealt at times with teams. You see that at every single level of football. I don't think that there's necessarily a need to push the panic button right this moment. Now, were there some things that need to be corrected and adjusted? Of course, Nick Saban has dealt with that, especially in the month of November, time and time again. He knows what it takes to win down the stretch. But at the end of the day, Alabama, it will still be in the top 4 in the playoff rankings when that comes out. The Tide are still very much in control of the West, very much in control of their destiny moving forward.
I think so. And look, whatever the expectations are for this team going forward, we said it this morning. I think you have to assume that if you're going to get to the playoffs, you have to beat Georgia. That looks like a really tall task right now with the way that this offense played tonight against potentially one of the best defenses we've seen in college football in the last few years. So that's concerning. It's worrying. It's going to be a tough road, but I think in terms of getting to that point, which in and of itself is an accomplishment for a lot of teams, that is definitely realistic for this team right now. They've got a game that should finally give them a little bit of a break and should allow them to get some depth, some experience next week when they play New Mexico State.
Yeah.
They've got a game that's going to probably take a bit of a physical toll in Arkansas the week after that. Arkansas is not a great team, but they have played a lot of really good teams very close this season. So that's a game that Alabama is going to have to take seriously. And then you've obviously got Auburn the week after that. And I'm very curious to see how Auburn bounces back after today. I think if there's a lot that we're still sort of learning about how that program looks under Brian Harsin, and they've had everything to play for. They've had a lot of reason to be motivated and play very well.
Sure.
So far this season. How does Auburn react now that stuff is sort of off the table for them, and they're really just sort of playing for pride and playing for bowl positioning? So we'll see. We'll see what Auburn looks like 3 weeks from now, and if they're still playing with the same level of intensity. If there's no drop off, that's going to be a very challenging game for this Alabama team. I think Alabama's defense looks great right now and looks like they will give Auburn's offense a really hard time. But I think the other side of that is true too. That Auburn defensive front is playing really mean right now, and I think they will give this Alabama offensive line a really long day if they don't make some major improvements between now and the end of the month.
Yes, there's a lot to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, if you will. One thing I want to bring up before we let y'all go is the special teams play. Just some miscues, Matt. Some very just some things that we really don't see from Alabama. And to me, it almost makes me feel as though there was a little bit of rust throughout this entire team when it comes to coming off of the bye week. Because when you have special teams miscues and a guy who is money and Will Riker, week in and week out, rarely misses, I think that just screams, okay, this team was maybe a little unprepared mentally going into a game against an inferior opponent that they knew was not going to be a huge challenge. Now, obviously, it ended up being one, but I just think that was maybe the mindset, and we certainly saw that early in this game.
Yeah, and I wouldn't put that missed extra point on Reichert. I think you could see the hold was coming down very, very late. So something went wrong in the snap hold process there.
Yeah.
But yeah, a sign of some sloppiness and rust, I think. And then not allowing a fake punt to catch you off guard when they were in
Exactly, yeah.
they were in safe formation. They were supposedly ready for a fake punt, just weren't ready for that fake punt. And then I think on top of it, just in general, a lot of mistakes from guys that we don't typically see. A ton of penalties tonight. We know how frustrating that is for Saban to give up free yards to dumb mistakes like that.
Yeah.
I think this is honestly, you could make an argument that Alabama played worse tonight than they did against Texas A&M. They just were playing a team that was not capable of generating the same level of offense, or they got a better performance out of their defense tonight. But this was not a game that Alabama looked like they were fired up for. It didn't look like the talk all week long of wanting revenge at LSU for that 2019 game didn't seem to be there tonight, outside of a couple of guys on that defense. So it's it's not a great thing to see, and I think it's important to see how this team responds next week against an opponent that there shouldn't be any real challenge against New Mexico State. There's not a single guy on that team that could probably even make the 110-man roster for Alabama. So how focused are they coming out next week?
Yes, we will certainly see. It should be noted that most teams that have this much of a subpar performance go on to lose, but Alabama does get it done at home against LSU, 20-14, the final score. Guys, thanks so much for tuning into the Alabama Postgame Show, brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. For Matt Scalisi, I'm Simone Eli. Have a great start to the rest of your weekend, of course, and then a start to your weekend. We'll see you next week for Alabama against New Mexico State. Have a good night, y'all.
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of healthcare.